So I'm here once again with the great Daniel McAdams. How are you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing great, Tommy. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. I'm glad.
All
I'm glad
right.
you're back on the
Good to be.
show, especially under the current circumstances. And like I told you before, I couldn't think of a better person to talk about this subject with. So USAID is not officially shut down, but apparently Musk wanted to shut it down, and Rubio stepped in and said, "Well, I'm going to take over. We'll reform it." But given the history of USAID in toppling governments and color revolutions, I figured let's dive into a little bit of their history. I know we're finding out some more stuff about what they've been funding as far as uh, different media devices overseas. I was just listening just before you popped on. Megan Kelly interviewed the guys from the Fifth Column today, and one of them was talking about how they have listeners in Poland that are like, "Yeah, suddenly this magazine that I read every week can't pay its employees."
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting.
That is, sorry, excuse me. I'm a
No, you're
little
fine.
dry out here. Um, yeah, it's fascinating. And, the thing is, the thing that the difficult thing is we have to start from the starting point of look, these guys in this administration, they're not libertarians, they're not anti-war people, they're not anarchists, they're not like we are. So, I mean, we get a lot of heat either way. Like, we're in the middle of the road, we get hit. If we say something negative about Trump, why don't you get on why don't you get on the bandwagon? What's wrong with you? Why do you hate America? And if we say something positive, then we have a lot of people who, what is wrong with you? It's really difficult. So it's really a challenge now to just try to sit back and say, okay, we're not going to get what we want, but we're going to get a couple of things that are interesting and helpful, and that might move us in the right direction. My old friend, the late great Bob Wenzel, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of him. He's been away, he's been gone for a while, but he had a great website called Target Liberty. And his whole philosophy was basically like anything that moves us toward liberty is good. So don't judge it beyond that. If it moves us in that direction, that's good. And so that's how I looked at the openness in USAID, because there are many people, and myself included, but there are many, many others, researchers who have been following this for decades, following the stuff that they do. Not just AID, but AID is a critical component of the U.S. meddling regime change system overseas. There's NEDs involved, state propers involved, CIA is involved, et cetera, et cetera. There are a few other cutouts that are paid. There are millions of subcontractors. All right. So the fact that now for me personally, because I put a lot of my life into this, that all of a sudden on the national stage, people are saying, wow, these are really bad guys. I'll take that as a win, even though I don't have any faith in Marco Rubio. I know he's not going to do the right thing. He still wants to take down the Chi-Coms. He still wants to take down the Iranians. He hasn't changed just because he's in his job. I think he's had his wings clipped a little bit, right? But he hasn't changed his stripes. Nevertheless, when you start seeing the stuff that they've been up to, like you say, the media, U.S. sponsorship of media overseas, the U.S. involvement in the so-called third sector, the so-called nonprofit, the so-called non-governmental sector overseas. Not only were we propping it up and being part of it, the U.S. government owned it. And that's why, like you were saying, all of a sudden magazines are like, oh, sorry, we don't have any money anymore. It's gone. It's fascinating. And I'll take the win on this, totally.
Yeah, I remember when in 2015 there was a story that popped up. I think in I can't remember who wrote it. I want to say it was in Technocracy News, written by James Wood, but it may have been somewhere else that I saw it. Anyway, it was about the expulsion of USAID from Russia, and it was talking about it from the standpoint that he was that Putin had kicked George Soros out of Russia, but what had happened was Putin expelled USAID, and George Soros happened to work on the board of USAID. And so, by extension, George Soros was involved in being expelled from Russia. And he only covered the fact that the Russia was upset about the Maidan revolution, but I read a little bit more into that because I had been reading some stuff from RT, I believe, that was talking about how Putin was still befuddled about the snow revolution in 2011. And I think what happened was when he saw Maidan take place and he was able to trace that money for Maidan, he realized that that snow revolution was also funded by the same people. And he made those connections to USAID and then expelled them from the country.
Yeah, the thing about USAID is that it's a classic propaganda ploy. Who can be against aid? What's wrong with you? What kind of a monster are you? You're not going to deliver some rice to some poor kids, in Indochina, whatever. They've got this branding that fits to their narrative. And everyone Dr. Paul wrote about it this week in his column. Everyone in their mind, they think of the bag of flour with AID on it, this kind of thing. Like, how could you cut that? But that's not what they do. That's not what they're about. They're about, and we're seeing it over and over again. The more light gets shined on it, they're all about regime change. They're all about undermining governments. Uh, you know, um, it was Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, put out a post on X earlier today where he said basically that all of the media that had been funded by the U.S. government in Hungary is now being exposed because in the absence of that funding, they're going under. And he said, well, the world owes a debt of gratitude to Donald Trump for bringing this about, for shining the light on USAID's illicit activities. And I responded to that saying that I do agree, but the US government also owes a huge apology to all of these countries in which it has manipulated the internal political affairs, the electoral affairs. These are sort of acts of war where you undermining the democracy, you're undermining the political processes, you're undermining the culture. In all of these countries, we owe a huge apology to these people when, some kind of reparations. I don't know what it would be, but this is terrible, terrible stuff. And the thing about Tommy, the thing about foreign NGOs, and we probably talked about last time I was on your show. I lived in Hungary for most of the 1990s, and I worked in NGOs. I worked in the NGO sector, and I worked in an NGO that was funded by a government. It wasn't the U.S. government. Um, uh, Funded not very well, unfortunately. But so I was in that world, and we were part of a network, a broader network that was actually funded by the U.S. government, called I think it's called the Forums for Democracy or something. It was early on.
Mm.
And even though our individual organization was not funded by the NED at the time, this kind of network was funded. And so they would all go on these, very, very fancy trips. Let's meet in Bratislava, so you'd have 50 NGOs meeting. And it felt like I was at a Politburo session because they were all the nomenclatura kids, the kids of the former Communist Party leaders who are now great, wonderful democratic reformers and enjoying a lifestyle in these NGOs that the victims of their parents in those countries could not even have dreamed of. So I don't want to, sorry to derail it with a long story, a long personal story, but the short version is that these NGOs, they paid much better than any local jobs. So they distorted the labor market. They sucked in people who were sycophantic, who had fancy tastes, and who had a predilection toward authoritarianism. And that was the case, and we're seeing it now. Now that it's being exposed, we're seeing that more and more.
One of the things that I find so interesting is the way that these NGOs utilize aid as a front for toppling regimes and working uh, to to push the hegemonic, American agenda on the world. It reminds me a lot of Confessions of an Economic Hitman,
Oh yeah.
right? And so it's like that's like the corporate front that comes in and is like, oh, we can do all this stuff for you to help you enrich yourself. You just have to sell out your country, right? And your countrymen. And it really feels like maybe not every NGO operates in that fashion, but it really feels like the top funded NGOs operate in that fashion.
And they don't even tell you you have to sell out. It's basically this is a big club, and you could be in it.
Mm.
The rest of your country, They just don't know what's good for them. They're just too dumb. We're the vanguard class. We understand this, and we're well funded. And you can go to, say you are a young kid in Albania, right? Where I spent a lot of time, and you have ambition. You may not be a bad kid. You may not be a bad young person. And all of a sudden, there's an opportunity to go work for a National Endowment for Democracy funded nonprofit. And some of the stuff is not that great, but your salary is four times what your dad's salary is, right? And you're
Mhm.
25, and you're jetting off to Zurich, you're jetting off to wherever, you're in all of these conferences, and they don't say, hey, you got to sell out. They make you think like you are part of this bigger system that's so important. And it's very insidious. It really is very insidious, what's been done. And it's been going on, well, since 1983 when the National Endowment for Democracy was created. But certainly now, I mean, tell me, I don't know how you feel, and I actually don't know how I feel anymore. Um, but I've written about this in the past that there could almost be a justification during the Cold War if you believe that communism was a threat. And at the time I did in the 80s when I was growing up. In retrospect, a lot of that was overblown, and we know that now. It's all fake. The missile disparity and all this was fake. They didn't want to rob us of our precious bodily fluids, like they said, right? That was all fake. But at the time, with the knowledge that we did have, you could justify, okay, we got to stop these godless commies, uh, you know. But certainly after 1991, with the implosion of the Soviet Union and the reduction, if not disappearance, of the Soviet missile threat to the United States, this stuff shouldn't be going on. It shouldn't have been going on. It shouldn't have been going on. It should have been stopped.
Yeah, I heard somebody say earlier that it seems like after the fall of the Soviet Union, these NGOs kind of lost their way for a few years, and just with once Obama was elected, they just clung on to popular left wing ideology. I don't know if I look at them so much as ideologues in the sense of left wing or right wing. I look at them more so as tools that are used by the intelligence agencies in order to further the American hegemon. Now, some people call that a left wing, ideology. I don't know. I don't really consider it one way or the other, left or right. I just consider it kind of the uniparty establishment, ideal that funneled up from the ideas of Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Mm. I was actually just going to say that name, and it was Brzezinski's ideas in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 80s. Those were then inherited by people like Strobe Talbott in the 90s when Clinton came in. That was a critical time. That was really the first post-Cold War administration. And you had people like Strobe Talbott, and I'm forgetting his deputy. He was dang it. He was the State Department. I think he was head of policy planning in the State Department. His wife was very big in the State Department. Nevertheless, what you had was the introduction of these kind of intellectual inheritors of the Brzezinski philosophy, which is reflexively anti-Russia.
Mhm.
And my friend Jim Jatras is much better. In fact, he was on recently with my other friend Larry Johnson. Highly recommend it to your viewers if you want to know what happened in those critical years of the very early 1990s. But these are the people that
I
took over.
almost I almost invited Jim to join us, but the last time I had you and Jim on a podcast together, I got kicked off of YouTube, and I haven't been able to post to YouTube since.
Well, you froze a bit. You froze a bit. I didn't hear the punchline.
Oh, I said the last time I had you
Are
and
you, are you
Jim
there? You're
on, yeah, the last time I had you and Jim on together, I got kicked off of YouTube, and I haven't been able to post on YouTube since then.
um,
That was in that was
really.
we were talking about
What did we
America's
do?
war with Russia in Ukraine.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, we had actually called out the fact that this was a war between America and Russia and not a war between Ukraine and Russia. And ever since then, I can't put anything on YouTube.
They sure give us a lot of credit for bringing Prescient then, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And isn't it funny how all the things that you get kicked off for back then are now common knowledge? It's not even controversial. Like,
Right.
dude, don't take the shot, you'll die. Oh yeah, you're going to be banned. 2 years later, dude,
Right.
you took the shot, you died.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying. I mean, that's such a critical era. That of that Kati Martin, his wife's name was. Sorry, she was Hungarian. But anyway, these people, they infiltrated. They didn't skip a beat. They infiltrated the State Department and they continued with their okay, it's not anti-Soviet now, it's anti-Russian, activities. And so this is sort of where it's just gone along on autopilot until
Hmm.
now. And now we're finally finding out a little bit more about it. I don't have much faith in people like Rubio, certainly not people like Waltz, the National Security Advisor, who doesn't seem very awfully smart, nor Kellogg, who seems less smart. But nevertheless, we got to take the win when we get it.
And we're getting like I said, we're getting these small leaks out right now coming from overseas about things that are being affected overseas. I'm wondering though if we're going to have like a document dump coming out from USAID to kind of really expose what their role was. I would like to know if they had any role in um, the Summer of Love in 2020. That's one thing that you and I have talked about in the
Yeah,
past, and I would like to know if they had any role in that. I would like to know where how much funding they had been given to like Ramaphosa to push farm murders on South Africa because my wife is South African. There are a lot of things I would like to know if USAID was involved in, or what their role has been in Zimbabwe since the fall of
yeah,
Rhodesia. I would like to know things like that. I think there's so many questions out there about what role the U.S. has had in the governance of the world that can be answered by revealing a lot of these documents, getting them in the hands of good reporters like Glenn Greenwald or Matt
yeah.
Taibbi, and have them sift through and expose some of these secrets that they've been keeping.
Yeah, the breakup of Sudan would be a great one too, because
Mm,
that was a big thing. Remember Darfur? We had to break up Sudan.
yeah,
There's the evil Muslim part and the great black part.
right.
I remember at the time, I went to lunch with the ambassador, Sudanese ambassador to the United States, up in Georgetown, and we're having a great talk. Really super intelligent guy, and he at one point because we were talking about the evil Muslim part of Sudan was oppressing the wonderful black part of Sudan. And the ambassador turned to me and he said, "Do I look Muslim to you?" And his skin was black. I mean, black, black, black. And he
Hmm.
said, "Look, this is artificial. It's totally fake. My name is Muhammad, what have you. I forget his last name. This is
Right.
all artificial. And this is all the stuff is cooked up by AID and all these NGOs, all these narratives. It's a
Mm.
constant narrative machine. It's so poisonous. It's poisonous to our society to have everything based on lies and narratives. But yeah, I'd love to see it. But don't forget, I mean, Ceausescu was not killed by Democrats. He was killed by Ion Iliescu, right? Because Ion Iliescu wanted to continue the policies of Ceausescu without
Hmm.
the burden of Ceausescu, Nikki, and his wife Elena, right? So Rubio may be the Ion Iliescu of our time. He may have killed poor old Nikki, but I don't know that we're going to see it. I could be wrong. I hope I am wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. It at the moment, all I've seen is a bunch of Democrats protesting outside the office of USAID, which I find hilarious because the people I depended on to get this information from, obviously, they're libertarians like you and Dr. Paul, Scott Horton, all of y'all I would depend on. But the other people I depended on to get this information were all leftist, whether it would be Max Blumenthal, Glenn Greenwald, Aaron Mate. Those are the people I would listen to on foreign policy, on what the CIA is involved in, on what USAID is involved in, and now it's just a big like now it's just this big. It's just so weird to see Ilhan Omar out there protesting out front of the USAID building, demanding that they open the doors back up. I'm like, what? Wait, what?
Yeah. It's mindless. Yeah. I mean, why doesn't she? I mean, she's from Somalia. She's obviously opposed to our policy in Somalia. Why wouldn't she say, okay, open the books. Let's see what you guys have been up to in
Hmm.
Somalia? Because I bet it's some pretty dirty business out there,
Yeah,
you know?
I
But
would
yeah,
imagine. I mean, how much, you know, we know for a fact that, with Timber Sycamore,
no,
Obama was funneling money to Al Qaeda to overthrow Assad in Syria. What was going on with Boko Haram when they popped up? What was that, 10, 15 years ago? They popped up
yeah,
out of nowhere. They were active for like 5 years and then they just disappeared. Where did they come from? Who was funding them? Things like that that just kind of occur, and it's just like this flash in the pan and then it's over with and you're like, what was that? Where did
yeah.
what started that?
What was that one warlord? Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting now. But it was the thing in like 2014. His name was John something from Africa. Where is he at? And it was a big thing. That was a huge thing. And it was and then remember the Khorasan group. They're even worse than Al Qaeda. You know, it's Al Qaeda on steroids, the Khorasan group. You know,
Right.
cue the music. Da, 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 da. We got to bomb Syria. You
Right.
know, I mean, all these narratives are all BS. They're all crap, and it's but you could see what's it name? Corby's. Dang it. Your listeners will know. My brain is gone. But yeah, I mean they just and then it's Boko Haram. Oh my God, we gotta do something about it.
Yeah. And then suddenly it's over. I mean, and there were reports. I remember hearing reports of like attacks in Namibia, which is where I went last summer, and then South Africa. And it was like, I was looking at Beatrix. I was like, has terrorism ever been a thing in South Africa? And she was like, no, all the Muslims in South Africa like to go out and do drugs. Like they're not religious zealots.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's
Well,
like,
that was
all right.
yeah. I mean, that was the same I mentioned Albania earlier. That was how it was in Albania. It's a 90% Muslim country. Nobody went to mosque. Nobody did anything until
Mhm.
the US wanted to stir up trouble in the Balkans. And what did they do? They introduced Al Qaeda into Albania. In fact, MEK has a Camp Ashraf in Albania. These are the people's what are they called? People's Mujahideen that want to overthrow the Iranian government. They introduced radicals into Bosnia, into Albania, radical Muslims, because they need to have these people. And that's why, to be honest, and I have some reservations about Tulsi because I think a reputation of being anti-war is a little bit too generous with some of the statements. Nevertheless, what a great achievement it was when she started talking about, as you say, Timber Sycamore and the CIA's involvement in propping up. And she said, I don't like Al Qaeda and I don't like when we fund Al Qaeda. That was a
Mhm.
great moment, I think.
Well, right. And see what I like Tulsi because she's kind of a bridge, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Because what I've noticed ever since she said that, Glenn Beck's reporting on Timber Sycamore suddenly,
Yeah,
and it's like, well, things are changing,
yeah,
because you have these mainstream conservatives that have always kind of been, we sweep all this stuff under the rug and we just support the troops no matter what, and we don't talk about the policies because we that would be against the troops. And it's like, and then we're seeing them start to come out and say, well, their timber sycamore was a thing that occurred under Obama, blah 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 blah. And Tulsi saying these things out in the open for the world to hear, things that we've, like, you and I have probably been talking about for years, that are now becoming mainstream talking points and people are willing to hear and listen to, and they're coming from these, stable conservative voices that have been in the movement for a long time. That it's like, okay, we're actually, maybe it's not necessarily a strict anti-war movement like you and I would like to see, but
yeah,
you know what, we started somewhere too, you
yeah,
know. So, and I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the beginning stages of, uh, the right wing in America becoming like the anti-war protesters, protesting Vietnam in the 60s.
Yeah, and there's a tendency, and I mean, I'm probably guilty too of getting a little bit PO'd, like, dudes, I've been talking about this for a quarter of a century,
Mm,
it's kind of like you kind of feel like how Ron Paul might feel,
right,
I've been warning since 1971 at the end of the gold, when they closed the gold window that this was going to
right.
happen. You don't get any extra brownie points for being right. You don't get an extra beer for being right,
Hmm.
and you're right. We'll take it when we can get it. And let's be frank, a lot of these movement conservatives are a bunch of knuckleheads. And the reason why they didn't think about it before is because they don't think about very much. They think about Team R versus Team D. They
Hmm.
think about how they're going to personally get ahead. They want to be rah, rah, rah for the guy that's going to bring them up. And so they're not real deep thinkers, and because the punishment of being a deep thinker is you get kicked in the face all the time. But like you say, we'll take it. If Glenn Beck wants to talk about this stuff, that's great. Wait till we tell him what's been going on in Gaza, though.
Well, and I think that Tucker Carlson getting fired from Fox and starting his own show gave people like Glenn Beck permission to
Yeah,
dig into this stuff like they never have before. Because Tucker Carlson just came out like just swinging for the
yeah.
fences with everything. And
And the thing that,
I
oh, sorry.
I mean, I was just going to say some of his shows might be a little ridiculous, like Obama's Lover or whatever that was all about. But, you know, he's not afraid to tackle any subject. And I think that's given permission to like the Megyn Kellys, Bill O'Reillys, Glenn Becks to actually start talking about these subjects.
And the other remarkable thing about Tucker is that he's willing to learn. He's not set in stone. This is what I don't you dare challenge me. And he even said, and I don't feel like I'm betraying. Well, he actually said it during the interview when we were down there when we were over in the studio when Dr. Paul was being interviewed. He said, and I think he did say it live when they were on the show. He said, when I first heard about you and you were talking about the Fed and everything, I thought this was crazy. What's this guy talking about? This guy's
Mm.
obsessed with something really weird, and I thought you were a kook. And then I started looking into it, and I started reading about it, and I realized, hey, there's something to this. And it's not just about that. There's so many things with Tucker that he wouldn't touch, and maybe it's because he wasn't allowed to.
Mm.
Um, but even things like China, he's not such an ideologue as he was in the past. That was always the sticking point for me. He was always so reflexively anti-Chinese, and he seems to have become a little bit more flexible on that issue. So it's sometimes it's hard to do. It's hard to admit that you're wrong on something. It's hard to see things differently. But you have to grow and adapt and read and change. And I think he does that, and that's what makes him exciting and relevant today. I mean, that I didn't see the whole interview with him and Pierce Morgan, but the couple of clips I saw were pretty awesome.
It was I was listening to it while I was driving. It was hilarious. I was laughing. I was like, and obviously Pierce is dug in. He's just like, I'm not going to admit that Zelensky's a dictator. And Tucker's like, well, you said the number one key to discovering whether or not somebody's a dictator is if they were democratically elected. And Zelensky didn't allow elections the last cycle. He's been killing his political opponents. He's outlawed uh, media that is politically opposed to him, and he's outlawed an entire Christian denomination. He's like, that sounds kind of dictatorish to me, man. If you like a dictator, all you got to do is say you like a dictator, And Pierce was like, well, I like him, but I don't think he's a dictator. And that was kind of like where that just wound up.
Yeah, don't bother me with the facts, man.
Right. Well, and then I just saw yesterday Pierce Morgan turned around and had Zelensky on and interviewed him for an hour and a half to respond to Tucker Carlson.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah. So I haven't watched it yet, but so
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff out there. I wish I had more time.
yeah, right. Yeah, that's the one thing that driving does give me is time to listen. So I do get to listen to a lot of stuff. I don't read near as much as I would like to, but I do get to listen to a lot of stuff.
Actually, it's
Oh,
what. Oh,
I'm
uh-oh.
breaking up again. It's my internet here at the
You there
house.
now?
It's
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was going to say my brother-in-law was a truck driver. He's retired now, but he was like a very, very mainline guy. I don't want to betray anything about him, but he was very, very mainline guy, mainline Republican, and then I went to see him, I don't know, a few years ago, and he's like, "Hey, I'm listening to this guy called Joe Rogan," and he's like, everything is bullshit. I realize now. So, so I was, I'm not a Roganite, but I mean, he's a very, very talented person, and I think he does. I don't know what's the term, red pill, or when you radicalize
Mm,
people. I think he does do
yeah.
that a lot. And I was like, okay, cool. You're coming in our direction, man.
Well, I've been a Joe Rogan fan for years because I grew up when I was in high school, I started watching UFC.
Oh,
And he became a commentator very early on in the UFC, like I want to say around 98, 99, somewhere around there. And then I had discovered, then I watched Fear Factor because he was the commentator for UFC. So I'm like, I want to know what this guy's up
mm,
to. So I watched Fear Factor and discovered he was a stand up comedian. And so I got into his stand up too. So whenever I found out he had like the largest podcast in the world a few years back, I was like, what? That's wild.
yeah, yeah. Very talented, and
Well, and he
he
has some really interesting guests on. I don't listen to every one of his shows, but I'll always tune in if he has like Dave Smith on or a Tulsi Gabbard. Um, he did a show one time with Tulsi Gabbard and BJ Penn. BJ Penn's a former fighter, a retired UFC fighter that's from Hawaii and is friends with Tulsi Gabbard. So that was an interesting,
oh yeah,
conversation.
for sure,
So
absolutely.
but I want to dive a little bit into like the peeling away of this onion. And I was surprised that the first line of attack from the Trump administration was USAID. I was I don't know if it was calculated because that was least the least desirable to defend, maybe he thought, like going into it. And if you watch like the Democrat senators out there protesting and giving speeches, they don't really seem like they're into it. It's like almost
Mhm.
like, yeah, we just have to do this because we have to oppose Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And because I don't know, like sometimes some of what they were saying, like I don't remember which one it was that was saying this is this is how we spread freedom around the world and Donald Trump is attacking it. It's like, yo, dude, you're not supposed to say that, like
Yeah.
and but what do you see next? Like I kind of was tongue in cheek when I found out about this. I tweeted out and tagged Elon Musk and Donald Trump and say, okay, In-Q-Tel next. But yeah, chances of that happening are slim to none as far as I'm concerned. But he's firing FBI agents. He I just found out today that he's paying CIA agents not to come into work. It's like all this stuff going on. I'm like, he dove right into the middle of the swamp this
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And I thought I had said this when I'd recorded with Kyle Matovich a while back. I said, look, when I saw Mike Pence as Trump's vice president in 2016, I knew that wasn't a serious campaign to do anything. Right. I knew that once he got into office, he was going to be stymied at every turn. But when he chose oh God, what's his name? I can see his face. Um,
JD.
JD Vance. Thank
Yeah.
you. As the vice president this time, I was like, there's some hope. There's going to be
Yeah.
some changes. This
Yeah.
is a different cat. And this is kind of, in doing it the day after he had gotten shot, I thought was like, okay, if y'all are going to shoot me, here's my insurance policy. Because I'm not an ideologue, this guy is,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's right. I mean, Pence, I mean, we knew Pence well in the House when Dr. Paul was there. The guy is a dope. I mean, let's just face it, the guy's a moron. He's a religious extremist. Hey, I don't care what your religion is, but if you're trying to rule over me and you want to bring that in, I don't think that at all. And that's what he was all about. And so you're right. I think that is a good point. I don't think he's going to go after In-Q-Tel. I don't think, unfortunately, a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of areas. And I mean, there are a lot of people that hate Musk because he has some shady ties, what have you. But the fact of the matter is, he's bringing in some young, very intelligent, very energetic people
Mm,
who are coming into these government agencies and saying, you guys are a bunch of lazy scumbags and you don't do anything. You just need to go. And that's great. And it's the amazing thing about it, he's been able to frame it in a way that will appeal to conservatives, you know, that he's giving these it's I was just as you were describing it, I was thinking of like the Bud Light commercial. Dude, you've ruined your brand forever. You can
mm,
do what you want, but it's going to take a hell of a long time to recover from this, bro. And
hmm.
that's what it's going to be with USAID. The brand is ruined. Now,
Right.
maybe Rubio wants to rescue it now, and take everything away from it and keep doing what they do under different guise. Maybe he wants to, you know, use it for his pet hobby horse, China and Israel, what have you. But nevertheless, the brand is ruined. And I hope they keep going. I hope the next is the National Endowment for Democracy, because that is so USAID is a governmental agency. The National Endowment for Democracy is the worst of all worlds because it's a pseudo governmental agency. Most of the money comes from government, but they have this independence. Now, the same is true with Freedom House, which we don't talk about a lot these days. But
Hmm.
Freedom House used to be a very, very big part of this. And maybe they're lying low, but there's this whole complex of organizations. Now, the NED has the IRI, the International Republican Institute, and the NDI, the National Democratic Institute. And then they have a trade union component and Center for International Private Enterprise, which is supposedly an economic component. But all of these are fronts for the war machine, the regime change machine. And
Hmm.
the Speaker of Parliament for the country of Georgia, just yesterday, they did a forensic analysis now that there's more information available, and they showed that USAID had spent $42 million trying to meddle in the elections in Georgia you know, 42 million. Can you imagine? And then he did a per capita and compared it to the US, where it would have been if a foreign country had done it to us. I don't have the figures in front of me, but it was astronomical. I mean,
Right.
we freaked out over apparently like a couple of Hillary ads in 16 or what have you.
Some
That was
memes.
yeah, a couple of memes, man. And here we have massive, massive meddling in the election. Georgia's a poor country. I've been to Georgia. It's a poor country. A few dollars goes a long way. It's a miracle that Georgia Dream survived this onslaught from USAID. Um, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine how many countries we don't know about that have been the victims of this really insidious intervention in
Hmm.
the internal affairs of other countries.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I'm hoping at least we get some exposure on what's going on, what they've been doing. And I'm wondering as Elon is able to dig through these documents, if he's not going to be able to make some links, right? Maybe National Endowment for Democracy is mentioned several times in several different documents, and it's like, okay, what is this going on over here? How much money are we sending over there? What are they doing? Maybe that's how this is all going to unfold, and it's all going to untie, kind of unravel before our eyes, because that these agencies intermingle, they overlap, they're always interacting with each other overseas. So that there's going to be some like some some trails that lead off into different directions that maybe Elon can follow and discover some of the other stuff that's going on.
And the thing is, it's more qualitative than quantitative. Because in terms of actual money, I mean, we're 37 whatever trillion dollars in debt. We have a $2 trillion deficit every year. If you cut out all of US foreign aid, that's going to be kind of a drop in the bucket. So in terms of balancing, quantitatively balancing the budget, you're not going to squeeze a lot of juice out of these grapes. But when you
Hmm.
think about it in qualitative uh, ways, this is the U.S. doing things overseas that are immoral, that are wrong, that are subterfuge, that are things that probably the Soviet Union did in Central and Eastern Europe after 47 and 48, when they finally solidified their rule in Hungary and Czechoslovakia, etc. I mentioned when we started, I did a retweet or a repost of Viktor Orban's post about the thanking Trump for showing the illicit U.S. activities in Hungary. And I said the time of Mikoyan and Shushkov is over, because this is what these are two guys, especially like in the middle of the 56 revolution in Hungary. The revolutionaries won, the anti-communists won. It was what, November 2nd or what have you, or yeah, 31st of October, they won. Soviets were withdrawing, and Mikoyan and Shushkov came in. They sent by the Central Committee, and they said, "Okay, you're out, you're in. This is what we're going to do. This is that." This is how it was in those days. And this guy's ideological, and this guy is close to the military, and this is what they do. We shouldn't be doing that. Why the hell are we acting like these guys? They were the bad guys, you
Right.
know?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's like that meme that says the good guys were never the ones on the side of censorship.
Yeah, exactly, exactly, exactly.
And when you look at that 42 million that went into Georgia, and then the Democrats like acting like they support all of what USAID has been involved in, it makes you wonder. It's like, what kind of hypocrisy are you like willing to not get involved in? And I know it's kind of like old hat to talk about the hypocrisy of politics and the hypocrisy of Democrats, especially, but it's just, this is something that's so blatant in my eyes, that so we can go and overthrow any government in the world. We can determine the election of any government in the world. If we don't like the outcome of the election, we can say it's illegitimate and throw it out and hold new elections for on behalf of the country. But if if there's even like, I don't know, let's say $100 million flows into the United States from China or Russia or whoever, Iran, then suddenly it's the worst thing in the world. And I'm not saying it's good, but I mean, if you've been doing it for all of these years, you can expect a little bit of it coming back your way.
Pharma, yeah. It's not even a couple $100 million. It's just a little app called TikTok,
Right,
right? A little
right.
a little app, because kids were looking at it and saying, "Hey, hold on, Israel's being pretty bad out there. Oh, we got
Mm,
to shut that down. Got to shut that down." Yeah, or things aren't that. The Chinese don't seem that awfully bad. They're not as bad as Marco Rubio tells us. Bill Kristol. And whoop, shut it down, shut it down. It's amazing. We propose, we presume that we can do all of these things to everyone else, but if someone does a tiny fraction of it to us, we have an absolute panic attack. And for all the things that USAID does, if they do anything good, which I don't know anymore, but if there's a disaster overseas, Americans, they open their pocketbooks. Big earthquake in Turkey, boom, where do I send my check?
right.
So what the government could do maybe would be to encourage that. Okay, well, send your check to Turkey after they had an earthquake, get a tax break or whatever. I don't know. Encourage something like that. Encourage true, generosity. The American people are very generous people, but this AID is not generosity. It's at the point of a gun.
Hmm. Right. Well, I can only hope that there are threads that they're able to pull on and discover some other stuff. I can't imagine that it would stop with USAID. Um, Trump's made it pretty clear that his focus is really on these intelligence agencies, especially with the selection of Tulsi Gabbard. No matter what you think about her foreign policy, as far as domestic uh, spying and um, intelligence agencies working on domestic soil, I have a feeling that she's going to be pretty good on that subject. She seems pretty key there. And my wife had asked me the other day, she goes, well, Trump has pardoned January Sixers. He's pardoned Ross Ulbricht. Is he going to pardon Edward Snowden? And I told her, I said, I don't know if he's going to pardon Edward Snowden, but I can tell you if he does pardon Edward Snowden, he's going to pardon Edward Snowden after Tulsi gets approved and
Yeah.
she's in office.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, 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 and I hope that happens. But the thing about the DNI position it's an odd position because it really doesn't have a lot of raw power. Ratcliffe will have a lot more power as the head of the CIA. The DNI is more of a coordinator role. I think the real power the DNI has is the DNI control a lot of input in what the president hears in the morning if he takes his daily briefings. Now, he may not even take that briefing. If I
Mhm.
remember right, Trump, it was a Trump or Biden didn't take the PDF, the president's daily briefing
He
from
didn't.
when he
Trump
took
didn't
his speech.
take it his first term.
Yeah,
I think he told him to only bother him if there's something important, like or
yeah,
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
You know.
exactly. So she won't have sort of in terms of like on paper, a lot
Mm.
of authority and power. And nevertheless, what I would love to see Tulsi do, and I don't know who she's talking to right now or who she knows, but if she were to call me and ask, I would say, you have got to get a team around you that is hard as nails. You got to
Mm.
get people that have been into Intel and I mean, I don't know if specifically the people, but the people that we know, like Larry Johnson, Doug McGregor, people that know this stuff inside. You got to get people in there who can be your insulation because they are going to try to rip you limb from limb if you really
Mhm.
want to make a change.
I have a feeling, and I guess maybe it might be naive on my point, but I think because she had spent time in Congress, she's run for president. You know, she's been on the bad end of these attacks for so many years and continued to serve and has continued to climb the ranks and become a lieutenant colonel. That I have a feeling that she knows the type of people she needs to surround herself with. I mean, I just I don't know. Maybe it's too much faith in who she is, but it just seems like you wouldn't make it that far in your career with all these slings and arrows being thrown at you.
Yeah, she's smart and she's savvy. I mean, the first Rage Against the War Machine rally, what was it in 23? I guess it was maybe. Um, but I was flying with Dr. Paul, and we got a message from her. I'm sorry, my dog is barking
Oh,
because
it's
there's a
okay.
cat outside. I'm like, yeah, okay,
My
go
dogs
ahead.
bark when there's nothing outside, so it doesn't matter.
But without revealing any part of the conversation, she I got a message from one of her people saying that she'd love to talk to Dr. Paul, and I've told the story before. Um, but they sat and I kept my distance. I was definitely not eavesdropping as much as I really wanted to. I'm like, oh. But they sat and they talked for like an hour, and I'm getting stressed out because we got to get to the rally, sir. We got to get to the rally. She talked for a long time, and the only thing he's kind of had is look in his eyes, and he said two things. She said she's running for something, and she's really really inquisitive and smart and wants to hear a lot and really wants to pick people's brains. And he was
Mhm.
just so impressed from that conversation. We thought maybe she'd want to run for president, but he definitely had the feeling that she's trying to talk to libertarians. It's like she wants to get this stuff straight, okay, this Fed stuff or whatever. I mean, I don't know exactly what they talked about. She wanted to
Mhm.
get it straight. She wanted to understood it, and she was like, boom. She's like a quick study on this stuff. So yeah, I mean, she's impressive, and she's no shrinking violet, man. She was pretty good. She was pretty good in those hearings. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, I've got a short temper. I would I would be saying some things that were not suitable for children for some of those things. I'll
Right.
be like, I'll be standing up. Oh yeah, you
Yeah.
want a
Yeah.
piece of me?
Yeah. Between her and RFK Jr.
Oh
and
yeah,
even Pete Hegseth, I
yeah,
don't know how they kept their cool, but all three of them, you
no,
know.
yeah, yeah. It's nasty,
And
nasty.
they fired back, but they would fire back in like a classy way. And
Yeah,
I would have been the exact I would have come over the desk and
you're like beep,
you know,
beep, beep, beep. They'd be
right.
blanking me out.
Right.
Like
They
a
probably would have
congressional
had to
record.
tase me.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I mean, I guess that's why no one's calling us up, Tommy.
No, probably. Yeah, that'd be a mistake to call me up for anything like that. Um, but with the okay, so what do you make of I mean, I don't know how else to ask it. Politico. they just had this whole thing going on with their funding. Maybe not funding, but the pay going out to their employees. Do you think that had anything to do with this USAID raid?
It's a good question. People are speculating. I mean, on the one hand, and I hate to say this, you could partly say it's a tempest in a teapot because, for example, I worked on the Hill for a long time for Dr. Paul, and I know that we had subscriptions to different newspapers because that's what we need. I mean, there was a main office, there'd be all the newspapers, Wall Street
Mm,
Journal, all this,
right.
because you had to have, I don't, today they don't even have that. I don't know what it is now, but so there was a legitimate reason to subscribe to these things. But from what I've read, there was like this, Politico executive or whatever, it's like 10,000 bucks a year. I don't know who needs that. Um, but it seemed very fishy that millions of dollars, and someone was saying like 25% of their entire income was coming from government sources. So there certainly seems to be some malfeasance there because especially when you talk about the Hunter Biden laptop, who did they go to? Politico. Hey, Politico. Hey, editor in chief. But hate to see some of this money disappear because guess what? Everyone else is struggling. Every other publication is struggling, and you guys are pretty flush with cash because so you might want to go ahead and cover the story this way. It has the appearance of corruption. The same is true at the New York Times.
Mm.
They get a
Yeah,
ton of
and I know Tim Pool talked about it earlier today. He did a live stream earlier that I kind of was listening to half ass when I was at the grocery store, and I he tends to think that the amount of government employees that are subscribed to these corporate media outlets is strange. But I'm like, well, I mean, they're going to get their media from somewhere, right? Like whereas I might pay, Daily Wire or whoever, they would prefer to pay New York Times, and so I don't know if I necessarily buy it unless you can trace the money directly back to departments or institutions within the federal government as opposed to individuals, right?
yeah,
Because that would be a different story if they're getting their money from institutions as opposed to individuals.
yeah. There's a lot that remains to be seen about it, but certainly the appearance when you have struggling media, the appearance of some media being favored, and I forget who it was who I think it was Michael Tracy. Maybe I could be wrong. But he pointed out it's not just the money because when you have this higher of a subscriber base, you're able to go to advertisers and say, look at our subscriber base. If half of them are government subscribers, you're going to get a bunch of advertising, you're going to get a bunch of other stuff too. So, but basically, it's hey, if you're going to be on the team, you guys are going to be doing just fine. So I
This is
wonder if
why
they'll survive.
Boeing advertises on MSNBC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you go to like Defense One or any of these trade publications for the military stuff, it's like there's going to be ads for F-35. It's not like you're going to be reading this saying, "Oh man, I got to go get an F-35." It's that check with my wife, see if we got the money for it. I mean,
Right.
that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about.
Okay, I think I want to wrap up on this. You'll have some good insight because of the years that you spent in DC, you spent around NGOs. Um, when I heard Marco Rubio talk about USAID has been a thorn in his side for years, for decades, trying to get information from them, trying to be, open with Congress. When y'all are dealing with these NGOs on the side of government, how are y'all dealing with them? How are they interacting with y'all? Do they interact with you as if they may be your employer, or how is this interaction taking place?
Well, now remember, AID is not an NGO in and of itself. It's a government agency. So they
Mm,
they were the government, and they would have
that's right.
had. Yeah, they would have an office in Rayburn, just like the CIA had a liaison office at the Rayburn office building. And so you could call them and contact them. But I can say from experience that every time I tried to contact an executive branch office, even when I was trying to be helpful to the then Obama administration, it was like pulling teeth. They just didn't care. And we were nobody, really, Ron Paul's office, he's not a chairman, so
Mm,
that you're not going to get a lot of information. But we did have some success in the early days because it became politicized later. But the Congressional Research Service used to be a fantastic resource for people, for staffers. We would ask, you could easily call. We did a lot. My colleague Norman and I did it a lot. The other people in Ron Paul's office, we would call. In fact, Lou Fisher is on our board at RPI. He was our guy at the Congressional Research Service, a serious constitutionalist,
mm,
separation of powers expert, which is really important. We would call someone up like Lou Fisher and say, "Hey, we've got a separation of powers issue. Can you help us figure this out?" And boom, you'd have a report the next day. They were great. They became politicized in the Obama era, sadly enough. And so
mm.
that resources, I don't know what the state of it is now, but we used to have our resources like that we could depend on. But who knows how it is now.
Yeah, I heard somebody say that office is what Doge is meant to replace, and so I guess we can wait and see how that all turns out. I know there's a lot of people up in arms about, the richest man in the world is taking over the U.S. government, and it's like, I don't know. It's hard to, I can't sit here and say that he's doing anything that Donald Trump hasn't signed off on. And if there is conflict of interest, then, there should be investigations. But I don't know. I don't know what, you know, uh, Elon Musk's conflicts of interest are and where he's getting funding. There's so many corporations are subsidized nowadays. It's like if you're involved in a corporation, there's a conflict of interest, right? So to me, lobbying is a conflict of interest, but nobody seems to care about them, So
Yeah, I mean, they want to say this is a coup, but one of the very few shows I listen to is the Duran, and Alexander Mercurius, I think it was, it said that it doesn't meet the criteria of a coup. A coup is when an illegitimate political force usurps the authority of a legitimate political force. This is a
mm,
legitimate political force. This is an administration that was voted into power. This is an executive branch controlled by an executive that won free and fair elections, and that person should have the authority to take action within the executive branch. And I think hopefully Trump learned from that first impeachment, where the main beef against him was that he wanted to cut off aid to Ukraine, and Vindman and all these freaks said, "Well, that goes against the interagency perspective on this." Dude, I am your boss. Let me
right.
explain it. So if that is what led Trump to say, okay, let's unleash Elon, let's give him a couple extra espressos or whatever his favorite drug of choice is, and let him go to town. Uh, you know, these are not necessarily libertarians. They're not our allies ideologically. But if we can get some tactical victories in here, I think we should celebrate them. And sometimes we're going to criticize. I criticize the dopey things that Trump said yesterday about Gaza. Nevertheless, I also cheer the fact that he's doing the right thing when it comes to AID and other things. So we're not going to get the perfect situation. We just got to take what we can.
Yeah, I think rightfully what Trump said about Gaza should be criticized. I also think that he deals with foreign leaders differently than he deals with domestic politics. So I think when it comes to him saying we're going to do this on the foreign policy side, I take that with a grain of salt until he actually takes some action
Yeah.
because foreign policy will lead to a war, and it's not likely that there's going to be a shooting war in within the boundaries of the United States of America because of the domestic policies of Donald Trump. So he's a little bit more forthright with his intent here domestically and a little bit more vague about what his actual intent is on foreign policy. So I wouldn't be surprised if all his talk about Gaza was something him giving the media red meat to chew on and to freak out about while they're distracted with this whole Gaza, he's making deals with Jordan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and they're working on something behind the scenes.
I hope that's the case. You're right, though. He works very differently, very different way.
Mm-hmm. Well, Daniel, I really appreciate it. Do you have any closing statements? Plug anything you got to plug, whatever you want.
Excuse me. Well, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind plugging something. Is that the Ron Paul Institute is having our spring conference in Lake Jackson, Texas, on March 22nd. We've got a great lineup of speakers. It's a heck of a lot of fun. We're real close to Houston. You can go to ronpaulinstitute.org to get more info on the event. We'd love to see all of your listeners and viewers at our conference as well.
Well, I appreciate it, Daniel. I'm going to stop the recording.